Thank you. How ironic I went for When Nobody's Watching on the quietest Sunday we've had in forever, which is quite strange. Oh, the pod is looking good outside, isn't it? I'd spent hours and hours this week slaving away, doing the old preserving on the outside, and you should see my back. I was wearing this really sort of muscle vest you wear for the gym just because it's been so hot, and my skin is now burnt to a crisp. I'm now peeling. I'm like a snake when it's shedding its skin, which is lovely. But during that process, I was doing it, and it's taken ages, about 14 hours in total. And I got 3/4 of the way through the second coat, and I was on the back wall, down below the fence. And I'd been spending ages getting the drips out because it's so thin, the preservative for the wood, it trickles down, so you constantly have to mop it up as you're going. So it's almost like you're painting it like 6 times. And I got round like 10 hours in, and I was like, why am I bothering with the bottom of the bit that's behind the fence that nobody's gonna see ever, because we're gonna store stuff behind there anyway? It's gonna preserve the wood even if it's trickly. And I left it for a little while, and it bugs me, and I was like, no, I can't. I still have to go and do it. Even though nobody's gonna be watching, nobody's watching me now, and nobody's even gonna see it, I'm still gonna try and do it right. Now, to be fair to me, I'm rubbish at that sort of thing, so it probably looks shocking anyway, but I've done my best. And so, it got me thinking about when nobody's watching. And it so happens that this last week as well, that Steph, I think I was in the bedroom doing some admin work on a laptop, and Steph came out and said, come here, which I always know means one of the kids is doing something funny. And she's like, come here. And we walked out, and my eldest, I got 4 kids, my eldest Joel was on our big trampoline in the garden, laying on it in the sun, and he was singing, bless him, songs from The Little Mermaid. This is on YouTube. Songs from The Little Mermaid, and we were just watching him, sort of laughing a little bit, because he would never do that if he knew someone was watching. And all of a sudden, he didn't know we'd been watching, but he then sensed that somebody's there, and he shut up straight away. Because fundamentally, we act differently when people are watching us and when people are not watching us. And that's my first point, is that we act differently when somebody's watching. We act differently when somebody's watching. And I want us to sort of hone in on that today. Or let's broaden it slightly. We act differently when particular people are watching. So sometimes it'll be person A for you, other people, they won't have any impact on them at all. For someone else, it'll be person B. But we act differently when anybody's watching. But we act differently when particular people are watching too. You know, it might be that my children might act differently around their mates when mum and dad are present. They might act just ever so slightly different. And some of that's natural and normal and maybe even healthy sometimes. But around their friends might act slightly different. Maybe just slightly, maybe incredibly different. We will never know because we're not there. But I don't know if you're like me, if this is weird, and I don't know why I do it. My dad's a policeman, right? And whenever I do this, I'm driving, and if I see a police car, I sit up straight. It's like I'm not doing anything wrong. It's like I look more presentable. Don't pull me over for the thing I'm not doing. But because somebody's there watching, in authority particularly, I act different for no, it's weird. And conversely, really, and I suppose that's why speed cameras are so good, even though you might hate them. The old speed cameras are rubbish because they just take a flash in time. Anyone can slow down quickly and then speed back up. But the average speed cameras they're putting out everywhere now, I say they're great, but they're great for making people slow down because everybody knows somebody's watching over a long period of time, and it makes us act differently. We act differently when somebody's watching. But conversely, we act differently when nobody's watching. We do. If we act differently when people are watching, that means we act differently when nobody's watching. Or like we said before, or when particular people aren't watching. Because you might behave completely differently maybe you're on holiday somewhere, nobody else knows you and your family. You might behave in a completely different way than you would in Tesco's when you know there might be people who are watching you. But we act differently when nobody's watching, or when nobody particular or specific that's meaningful to us is watching. So I want to ask you this question, and you might feel uncomfortable, but I don't care. What do you do when nobody's watching? Some of you are like, that's a bit personal, Phil. And I want us to put the private stuff aside. I don't mean like going to the loo or taking a bath or the S word, shower. Put all them things aside. I'm not talking about them sort of things. I'm talking about all the other things that aren't encapsulated in that. What do you do when nobody's watching? And I thought back about this when I was growing up. And I remember this vividly, like in rugby training. I played rugby for like silly amount of years. That's why I'm so broken now. My body hurts all the time. Is that we used to run around the rugby pitch, I don't know, like 3 times for a little warm-up, and the coach would just be in the middle or standing in one place. But nearly all of us would take a little peek, and if he wasn't looking, we'd cut the corners. Because they were always very clear, make sure you go round the corner flag, you have to go round the outside. But even if you could just squeeze half a metre off of that warm-up, you'd do it. And not even just to save energy, just to see if you can get away with it. And so I remember we'd do it because it would really annoy the coach. And so we used to do that because it was fun. And then I thought about it with swimming. I used to swim competitively as well, and so we'd train like 3 or 4 times a week. And swimming training was like an hour and a half long. You go up and down, freestyle, breaststroke, backstroke, pull, kick, everything, the whole lot. And any time you're swimming, and I could see the coach wasn't looking, and I was getting tired, I'd just give a little pull on the lane rope. Whee! You're a swimmer as well, aren't you? Just a little pull on the lane rope. Can I tell you, I can swim real fast when I'm pulling on the lane rope. I'll be in the Olympics, I get gold, because you can go really fast on a lane rope when you're getting... But I'd only do it when people were watching. If I'd looked up and I saw my coach watching, there's no way I would have pulled on the lane rope. No way. We act differently when nobody's watching. And then I thought about it when even younger, when I used to have a paper round from the age of 11. My mum would kick me out of the house at 6 and say, bring us back some money, back in the good old days. And I'd have a big paper round. It used to be on Cloverfields, I remember. On Sundays, it was awful. I used to have 2 big bags. And then I'd end up having to put them on the front of my bike on the back. No wonder, actually, I think that knackered me, not the rugby. And I used to go house to house, and the rules technically were you had to go up people's driveways, up their paths. But the way the houses are situated, most of the time, it's just quicker if I just walk across the grass. And I'm like, that's efficient. That's the way, so I would do it. But I'd never do it if a neighbour was in their garden. I'd be like, good morning. But if they weren't, I'd just walk across. And I'd try and do it respectfully, but I would. But I'm sensing a theme with all of these. It's like, wherever I can find a shortcut physically, when nobody's watching, that's what I would do. Which is funny now, I now, as an adult, go to the gym and do extra work, even when nobody's watching and the gym's empty. But for me, maybe none of them you can resonate with because you hate sport and you don't do anything like that. But one thing that really annoys me, and me and Steph, she learnt this about me very early, and it sort of tainted my view of Steph a little, because one day I saw a guy at a supermarket just push and throw his trolley in the middle of the car park. Just get in the car and leave. And I'm like, what? I wanted to follow him, but like, tap him on the shoulder. I'm like, who's going to put that away? And I know what his response would be. There's someone who does that. It's their job. If I don't do it, they won't get paid. And then I'd want to punch him in the face. So I didn't approach him. What I did was, like a good Englishman, I passively aggressively went and picked his trolley up, smiling at him, and be like, I'll do it for you. Because he thought nobody was watching him. And if someone was there watching him, maybe he would have acted differently, maybe not. But it annoyed me so much. And Steph was like, oh, that's a bit strange about you. And then, but she didn't register it properly, because one time we were in Tesco's and she picked up something from an aisle and then halfway around the store realised she didn't want it anymore. Who are these people? And just put it back, but not in the spot she got it from. And it's like, because no employee was watching, that was cool. And I was like, that is not cool. That is not cool. And I marched her back. And now she doesn't do it anymore. Well, she didn't until we had 4 kids. Now we haven't got any time. We just throw stuff all the time. We just... And these are silly things, but what do you do when nobody's watching? Maybe if it's all different types of things. And I'm not saying any of these things are good or bad, but maybe they're things that you've determined are not good or healthy or bad or your best or what even you want to be. But because nobody's watching, you do them anyway. And that could be anything from drinking alcohol, from smoking, from flirting, from gossiping, from treating your loved ones badly when nobody else is watching. It can be anything. It could be being lazy at work when your boss isn't watching. It could be you being angry and getting angry, but you wouldn't do it if other people or particular people were watching. It could be that you become aggressive, damage things. It could be that if you're younger, you go places that your parents don't know you're going, or you stay out late. It might be that you eat junk food quietly on the side and let nobody know, even your spouse. It might be that you sneak a piece of cake, or maybe you've got a chocolate drawer, like I know some adults do, that nobody else knows about. If at school, it might be that you act different when a teacher leaves the room. I remember at high school when a teacher would have to leave the room for some reason. It was carnage, because we do act differently when nobody's watching. So what do you do when nobody's watching? Because it's different for all of us. It is. It's different for all of us. But sadly, often, I think, it's just my opinion, we do the worst things when we think nobody's watching. We do the worst things in us. The worst things about us. The worst things come to the surface and manifest when we think nobody's watching, or when we think certain people aren't watching. And you think about scripture about this, you know, Adam and Eve disobeyed God because they thought no one was watching, or the right person was watching. When you think about Moses, and it says in Exodus 2, it's something like, it says, after looking in all directions to make sure no one was watching, Moses killed the Egyptian. He saw the Egyptian mistreating one of his people, one of the Israelites. And it says in Scripture that he had a good look around to make sure nobody was watching before murdering and killing this person. So there's this inherent knowledge that what I'm about to do is wrong and I don't want anyone to see it. So I make sure nobody's watching. And obviously someone did actually see it. Otherwise we'd probably have never been found out in the way that he was and ran away. When you think of his brother Aaron years later, while Moses was up in the mountain having a ching-mag with God, and he comes down, and Aaron would be, while nobody was there, while his brother, the person in authority over him, wasn't there, decided, well, let's make some idols and let's worship a golden calf. Moses must have come down and, what? I've only been up there a few days. And so we all do different things when we're watching. Often the worst things come out when nobody's watching. When you think of Jesus in the garden when he went away and left his disciples, and he even said to them, watch out for me. I'm not watching you. You are in charge of watching out. And 3 times he come back and they're asleep, because we act differently when nobody's watching, or we think nobody's watching. When Jesus even told Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times. No way. When Jesus was there and a soldier come in willing to cut his ear off, he was willing to die for Jesus, but Jesus wasn't there. All of a sudden, timid and denying that he even knew Christ when nobody was watching, or when he thought a particular person wasn't watching. So often, we do the worst things. The worst things about us come out when we think nobody's watching. And I do want you to think about this. When I asked the question originally, why or what do you do when nobody's watching? My mind went here, probably yours did, but I want to ask, why does our mind gravitate to the bad stuff? Because I probably posed that question. You probably started thinking of the bad things you do. And yet I didn't make it that. But we went there in our mind. Or most of us did. Maybe you didn't. Maybe you're like Mary Poppins. That's great. But we go there in the mind. Why not? Why not the good things? Why do we gravitate towards the bad things when I ask that particular question? Why the bad instead of the good? Because I don't actually, even though it sounds like it, I don't actually want to focus on that at all today. I don't want to focus at all on the bad things that you do when nobody's watching. I don't want to talk about that. But more so encourage us all, myself included, to do more of the good things when nobody's watching. And Jesus put it like this, and we've read this multiple times in this church, because it's one of my favorites about the Sermon on the Mount, but we're going to read from Matthew 6. Matthew 6, 1-2, it says this, and Jesus was given some great advice. And we read this only just a few weeks ago, but be careful, it says, not to practice your righteousness. So he's saying that's good to do, it's a good thing, but not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. And that's the motive he's talking about for doing it. And if you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. It's like there's no reward for that sort of behavior. So when you give to the needy, which he's saying is a good thing, it's a good thing to do not announce it with trumpets Like, look what I'm doing, it's great. And for us, we don't have the trumpets. We have social media, we have our phones, we have our conversation with people, how great we are. It says, don't announce it like that, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. That's the reason you're doing it. Not just the reason you're telling people, but actually the reason why you're doing the good thing. He says, truly I tell you, that they have received their reward in full. So Jesus said, don't do that sort of stuff. Jump down to verse 5. It says this, and when you pray, don't be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Again, there's your motive. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. That's their reward. That's the reward you get for praying, is people thinking, oh, you're so religious and spiritual. That's all you get. And for some of you, maybe that's all you want. But it says, but when you pray, check this. Jesus said, go into your room, close the door. He's saying where nobody's watching. When nobody's watching, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret, I love that, will reward you. And jump down to verse 16, he goes on to say, and when you fast, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others they're fasting. They're like, oh, I've eaten in 3 days because I'm so religious and I'm doing it for God. Aren't I brilliant? I was expecting a little applause, never mind. It says this, truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. That's all the reward they get, just that man reward of people thinking, oh, aren't they good? But when you fast, put oil on your head and wash your face. That's just good advice anyway, wash your face. So that it will not be obvious to others. It's not going out of your way to not do it while people are being seen, that people are seeing you or watching you. And it says this, but only to your Father that it seeth, who is unseen, and your Father who sees what is done in secret, again, will reward you. And so Jesus is quite clear that it's what's done in secret that's rewarded. It's what's done when nobody's watching that adds value to our life and adds value perhaps to our eternal life, but in time even builds our character. And so when I ask the question, what do you do when no one's looking? I don't want us to think about the bad things, even though that's something we might have to examine sometimes. But I want us to think about, do we do the good things that Jesus told us to do when nobody's watching? Because I did ask, we do the worst things when we think nobody's watching. But I would say that Jesus wants us instead to do the best things when nobody's watching. So often we do the worst things, but Jesus wants to encourage us. No, that time when nobody's watching, that's when I want you to purposefully do the best things. That's when I want the good in you to manifest itself. Not when people are watching, but when people aren't. Jesus wants the best of us to come to the surface when nobody's watching. He might say, give when nobody's watching, love when nobody's watching, be kind when nobody's watching, help when nobody's watching, serve when nobody's watching, help when nobody's watching, worship when nobody's watching, study the Bible when nobody's watching, pray when nobody's watching. All these things that are good and rich and add value to our life, I believe Jesus will say, do them things when nobody's watching. It doesn't mean that they're all wrong to be done in a public place or in a communal sense. But he's saying the heart of that, all them good things, to get the value out of them, you want to be doing them when nobody else is watching. I want you to think about this. If the majority of your spiritual life is conducted when people are watching, then who are you really doing it for? I really want you to ask yourself that question and maybe hazard to answer it. But if the majority of your spiritual life is conducted when people are watching, then who are you really doing it for? Or more importantly, I could put it like this, who are you really? Not who are you just really doing that for, but who are you really? If you only do these things while others are watching, for the people who are watching, who are you? Who am I? Which poses the question, who are you when nobody's watching? Because perhaps, and just perhaps, that's an indicator of the real you. The deepest you. The authentic you. Perhaps that is when, who are you when nobody's watching? Perhaps that's a glimpse into the real you, the deepest you, the most authentic you that is actually real? And so I want to ask myself this question, but I'll ask it of you because I've asked myself this all week is, are you more like Jesus when people are watching or when they're not? Are you more like Jesus when people are watching or when they're not? And Paul wrote a letter to the Colossian church, and he was trying to be very inclusive about who he was talking to, but he honed in on he was talking, because in a culture where there were slaves or servants or people who were mistreated or owned, and Paul wasn't condoning that and saying this is a great way to structure society, but he had to speak into that society. And he said this in Colossians 3:22, it said he was talking to slaves or servants or people who are under people in authority. Obey your earthly masters in everything you do. And check this, try to please them all the time, check it, not just when they are watching you. Not just when they're watching you. Serve them sincerely because of your reverent fear of the Lord. That's why he said that's your driver, is your reverent fear of God. Is the driver of why you would serve your earthly masters. Even if you disagree with the socio-structures, the economic structures of why you're there. This is what I want you to do. I want your character to come out, even when your masters, those in authority who are in a position to actually punish you, aren't even there. I want you to serve them as best you can. So I want to ask you, when are your best deeds done? When are your best things done, the best things you do? Not just your attitudes and the things that come out of your mouth, but when are your best deeds done? Only when people are watching? And I thought about it like this, and I love our little opener with the seats and the theatre curtain. And posing this question or this thought is, if you act differently, I want you to think about this, if you act differently when certain people are not watching, then when they are watching, then you are acting. If you act differently when certain people are watching, then you are acting. You're actually playing a character. And you're giving the performance of your life. You're giving the performance of your life, not in the way in the performance of your life on the West End stage, the best one you've ever done, but you're giving a performance of your life. It's a character you're playing. If you're very different in lots of regards and act differently around certain people, and I want to put just put a stamp on that. I think it's normal and natural and sometimes good that we behave in slightly different ways dependent on the situation, dependent on who we're with. I think that's normal. Paul would even say it's good being all things to all men, to win a few of them. We've got to morph ourselves at some times. You know, you act differently when you're in authority or teaching than you do when you're receiving. You just naturally, these are normal social norms that we fit into society, so we grease the wheels, all right? And some of them are just neutral, some of them are actually beneficial. But I think we know the difference between them things. When we're acting differently around people, and we're acting and we're playing a character, and we can do that. And I think maybe I've done that in the past, and maybe I'm the end of the spectrum personality-wise that is less inclined to do that because I don't really give a monkeys about what people think. And maybe from the other end of the personality spectrum where you're very concerned about what other people think, maybe you're more naturally lean to doing that. But we all do it in some regard, in some ways, I think, unless we pay attention to it. But if we do, we're playing a character that we've created. And I want you to think about this, but perhaps you, me, perhaps you're pretending to be the person you actually really want to be. When we're performing, when we're acting differently when people are watching, what we're saying even to ourselves is, that's who I want to be. I'm being this character because in some way I idealize that. I'm saying I actually think that's a good thing to do. And so I will do it when people are watching, but when they're not, I don't. Even though I think it's good and want to be like that. So you're pretending often to be a person you've created that you actually really want to be. But I want to say this, that Jesus doesn't want us to play a character. He doesn't. I don't think Jesus wants us to play a character. He wants us to develop our character. So maybe we should, I think, focus on developing our character rather than playing one. Focus on developing our character rather than playing one. It says in Philippians, Paul wrote to him and said, in Philippians 1:11 says, may you always be filled with the fruit of your salvation. Check this, the righteous character, that righteous character produced in your life by who? By Jesus Christ. For this will bring much glory and praise to God. Paul wrote that it should be always, when people are watching, when people aren't watching, we should be demonstrating this righteous character. And that's produced in our life by Jesus Christ. And he wants us to develop that character with his help. And I believe, if I'm honest with myself, I believe the fastest route to a righteous character, the route to becoming more like Jesus, lays not in what we do when people are watching, but when people are not. I think the fastest route to actually getting there, to actually having a righteous character in the way that God would want us to have and becoming more like Jesus, the path to that, the fastest route is to concentrate on what we do when nobody's watching, not when people are. I want you to think about this. I believe this, that your relationship with Jesus is developed when nobody's watching. Your actual personal relationship with Jesus is developed when nobody is watching. Just like, and I want to be clear, I think our relationship with Jesus can be developed in communal settings, in coming together and all that as well. But I really believe, just like, for instance, like a marriage, the real deep personal parts of a marriage are developed when nobody else is watching, just you and them. That doesn't mean that all the other people around and friendship groups and family and mums and dads and kids don't all play into that and support that. But what I'm saying is that real deep, meaningful relationship comes about when you two build that relationship when nobody else is watching. The foundation of marriage is built on them interactions with your spouse when nobody's watching. And I believe it's the same with your relationship with God, that the relationship is mostly done when nobody else is watching. So I ask you again, what do you do when nobody's watching? I was thinking about this. Imagine us developing our character so much and becoming so like Christ that we can live like everybody's watching when nobody's watching. And I think our character is developed, or we should try and develop our character when nobody's watching, so that it's ready for when people are watching you. Think about, I'm nearly done. I think about characters in the Bible like Joseph, who was locked in prison for years. And it says in Scripture, I think it's in Psalms, that God was testing his character when nobody else was watching, when even Joseph thought nobody else was watching. That's when his character was developed to be the second most powerful man probably on the planet at the time to save thousands of people's lives. We think of David and Goliath and that battle that David had and took Goliath out and went on to become king. You know, so often we think his fight with Goliath was the foundation of his journey to being king, but it wasn't. Initially, it was through the prophet Samuel, and no one else knew about that necessarily, but through him and his journey of his character, it was when he was fighting off bears and lions, when he's protecting sheep. His development of character and his characters to not fear fearful things that are dangerous came when nobody else was watching, when only sheep were watching, who don't really have an opinion, but we think a show, you know, if you go and watch a West End show or something like that, we think the performance on the night you go with your ticket on that one day, you know, they've done it hundreds of times, but you think it's special because you're there. But we think in a show, in a performance, the bit in front of people is the important part. But it's not. It's the hours and hours and hours of practice and rehearsal when nobody else is watching. And I think it's the same with our character and God developing our character. If you think about some of you who like Strictly Come Dancing or whatever it is, Strictly Come Dancing on Ice or whatever it's called. You know, you can watch that on the telly and you think the dance they do in front of people on the television with lots of people or millions of people, although most people don't watch TV, with the 45 people who are watching live. You think that's the important bit, but it's not. It's just the combination of the hours of work that have gone on behind closed doors. They don't come out and pretend they can dance, do they? Imagine them coming out, although it would be, I would watch the show then if they had no rehearsals and said just dance. Like, and they have a professional dancer who's dancing next to someone like me. I'd watch that. I might even pay for that. But they don't. They put hours in, hours and hours and hours, and they come out and, sometimes not brilliantly, but dance. They don't come out and pretend to dance. They actually dance. A boxer doesn't win the fight on the night. They win by training their butt off for months and months before the fight. They might actually win the fight on the night, but they don't win the fight on the night. They win by the training that they do before, leading up to the fight. And Paul wrote to Timothy, and he wrote like this: physical training is good. In some scriptures it says of some good, and some of you prefer that one. Physical training is of some benefit. Physical training is good, but training for godliness is much better, promising benefits in this life and the life to come. That's not an excuse just to read your Bible and not go to the gym. It says do both. It's just the Bible bit's probably more important. But training for godliness is much better. Training, check that, training for godliness. And I think unlike ballroom dancing, training for godliness is not a spectator sport. It's not a spectator sport. It's not you behaving in ways in church culture or in front of other people and you learning that craft. All you do is learn religious behaviors and to play a character where you can get by with the least friction. So training for godliness, for me, is not a spectator sport. That's behind a closed doors kind of thing. That's and again, sure, we can get together and encourage each other and equip each other and build each other up and correct each other, all that. That's all part of it. But the hard rounds, all the really difficult parts, it's just when it's just you and Jesus. And I thought this about myself, but I'll ask it of you. What if the real you was so like Jesus that we didn't need to act when people were watching us? What if we were so like Jesus that we didn't need to act at all when people were watching? And that with Jesus and developing that character one-on-one when nobody's watching, we've built our character so deep when nobody's watching, so that when people are watching, you can simply be yourself. I think what you do when nobody's watching is more important than when people are. I think that's fundamentally true. So I want to ask you for the last time, what do you do when nobody is watching? Let's pray.